Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is Feb 24, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Thom Gencarelli. Tell me if that's the right way.
That's perfect. You got it. It's not easy.
Thank you so much. Also, we
Sure.
want to thank Adina Karasik for connecting us. Thom, where in the heck are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Hastings on Hudson, New York, about 8 miles north of the New York City border.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being is learning and knowledge.
Oh, I love
and
that.
Informing oneself to build that. Yep.
What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, I'm a print guy. I come from the media ecology PhD program at New York University a bunch of years ago, and I studied under Neil Postman, and I've always been a print literate guy. Of course, now it's text, but Marshall McLuhan will tell us that what we learn from a print media mentality is going to ensure that we know in ways that have created the culture that we've been gifted with.
So just to divert, did you become a print person because your parents told you to read? They did it as an example or on your own?
So my mother read bestsellers and romance novels, but she was a role model as a reader because she did read. My father read the kind of tabloid newspapers that you start from the back, right? Because the sports section is in the back. And that's really most of what I saw him read. I didn't have them as models, but I did sort of come of age at the tension point between when television came into its own in the early 60s. I'm dating myself telling you how old I am, but and as it took off, I sort of had that coming out of the end of the print era and into the post-literate era that we're in now.
Yeah, that's cool. Harold Bloom says something like, I think it's him, says something like, us baby boomers learned we didn't read books so much, we read the lyrics of the rock songs.
Yeah.
So it is sort of true. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I don't think that they necessarily do enough on the whole. I wish that they did. I became an educator, I think, because I think that education is the solution to all of our, social and civic and global problems. I mean, we're having this talk on the day of the 1-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. I wish that more people would take advantage of doing so, of educating themselves, taking it on themselves rather than, going through the system of schooling and the institution of schooling.
Wow. Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
That's a great question. I think it's invented. I think we are enculturated, and I think that what happens is that there are some people who will accept and buy in and find that it's important. And again, maybe it's because of their influence, the influence of their family coming into it. And then other people will, shy away. And maybe it's because somewhere along the line, in their schooling, they felt, belittled, they felt stupid, they had some kind of learning disability, something turned them away from it. And so I think it's invented. The system obviously is. But, unfortunately, not everyone takes advantage of the gift.
Really well put. I appreciate how articulate you are, and you're really getting it. Do thoughts create emotions?
Sometimes, yes. From a general semantics point of view, the way we talk to ourselves can definitely influence our emotional life and get us stuck in there sometimes too.
Is thinking more innate or more invented?
Thinking is invented. I mean, again, well, when you talk about, thoughts and emotions, thoughts and feelings, right? We talk
Yeah.
about them separately. We've been talking a lot about artificial intelligence. Obviously, Chat GPT and OpenAI is a big thing right now. And when you start to think about artificial intelligence versus human intelligence is about that balance, the equal effect of both our visceral and emotional life and thinking. But thinking, as I often say to my students, is talking to ourselves in our head. And
Wow.
talking and using language, that's an invention.
Really good. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until I write it. I
Hello.
say it and I kind of want to, sometimes take it back and say it again, but I can't. It's out. When I write it, I can work it, and then I know what I think.
Thom, that's funny because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
And yeah, McLuhan, I don't know if he even really knew what he thought when he said it. He would just say, you don't like that idea, here's another one, right?
Yeah. Can humans think without language?
They do. And while we're talking about McLuhan, right? Let's talk about the difference between percepts and concepts, right? You living in the world and taking in information through your senses, you respond to it, you react to it, and it's a form of thinking. But humans, as the simple making creatures, inventing language as the primary symbolic system for what we, refer to as meaning and meaningful. That elevated things, and that's why we, have dominion over the planet in the long run here. But sure, the infant, before they acquire language, thinks, but it's again mostly about taking on in information and trying to figure out in a pre-linguistic way what to do with it.
Yeah. This is a stupid question. I know it's both, and it depends. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Okay, I hope I don't give you a stupid answer. Are we? I think that it depends. I think I'm both, and sometimes one comes across stronger than the other, and I don't necessarily always know why. But I feel like I live in both worlds. Again, media ecology is kind of about balance, and I think naturally I'm kind of a balanced person: left brain, right brain, thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. No, that's good because most 80% of people say we're more feeling beings, but you can't really separate feeling from thought in the big picture.
Nope.
But we think we can because we invented the words.
Yeah. Okay. So, and we think that the words override. I'm really curious about that 80% figure and where you got that from. That's interesting.
Well, that's for 40 years of asking people that question.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, but here's what they usually say, Thom. Are we more feeling or thinking beings? They go, I think we're more feeling beings. They literally say that. And my friend counters it. He always goes, I feel we're more thinking beings.
Well, you can feel we're more feeling beings and think we're more thinking beings too. Okay. Yeah.
These are two from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't know what the soul is, so I can't answer that question. I would love a definition of the soul that I could accept, and I haven't come across one.
Yeah, that's fine. Actually, that's the answer I get the most on that question. The second Turing is, can machines think?
Machines, a computer is an information processor. It is effectively part of what we do, right? We're information processors. A couple of questions ago, when I talked about the idea of thinking without language, yeah, we take in information from our environment, we process it, we react to it, we respond and act. But to talk about a machine as an information processing system limits the idea of what we would refer to as thinking, and it is not what we do.
Yeah, very good. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I more pursue meaning. I'm hoping it will lead me to happiness. Sometimes it does, sometimes no. Yeah.
Well, I got it from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He says, meaning more likely lasts, happiness doesn't necessarily last.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Well, we do create it, but it's there already. I mean, consciousness, right? Was it Watson of Watson and Crick fame, calls it the hard problem. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? What is the root of it? And the brain's a pretty complex organ, so far as I understand it. I have a good friend who's a neurologist, and he said, among neurologists, we know that, in a room the size of the one that you and I are sitting in, neurologists know this much about how the brain works.
Right.
But that it's the seat of consciousness.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually heard that on your YouTube thing, and I thought that was great. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
The speed of light. Thought's got to be careful. Thought's got to take time. It's got to be reflective.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rayner responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
What new tool? I don't know if I suggest new tools. I think I'm stuck using the old tools. I believe in the old tools, which is really language-based and language coming from a print literate tradition. I think that's the keys to the kingdom.
Great.
Not just the master's house, right?
Yeah. What new toy do you suggest?
What new toy? Ooh, that's a great question. I'm not the kind, as a person who studies media, I'm not the kind of person who celebrates everything coming down the pike, but I'm certainly interested and curious about all of them, and I want to know how they work, and I want to know what I'm always going to start out thinking, and what is the consequence of this thing going to be?
Yeah.
So, I don't necessarily like the stuff that's suddenly happening with open AI, but I am certainly going to follow it with every bit of energy and attention I can muster.
Super cool. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Everything. I had a professor named Henry Perkinson, and the gist of his philosophy about human civilization, and he was an educationist. He really believed that as human beings, we're getting better, that we're trying to reduce error, that we're trying to improve ourselves and our lot. And, I was walking down the street with him one time, and I said, Henry, do you really believe this? Because, I mean, sure, we can, look at things. I live in New York, and, New York at the beginning of the 20th century, it was a horrible, polluted place for, the average person to live. And we cleaned it up. The Hudson River that I live by, we're cleaning it up. But at the same time, we're animals. We're still killing each other. I worry about everything.
It's really good. I sometimes ask this question. Yeah. Well, it's no, I mean, it's really good how I feel you're being honest, bare bones, and you're just laying your cards on the table. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
But it's like I used to have this question called, is human progress cyclical or cumulative? Are we going in circles, or are we getting better or worse? And I really come to the conclusion it's sort of like a cone, like your friend. Sometimes we're going in circles, but we're getting better, and sometimes we're spiraling down. So,
Yeah.
I left a question out. I can't believe it, but I have to go back. Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
It depends upon what I'm trying to do when that happens. I will admit that there are times when I try to use language to fix the problem. But if, for instance, we're talking about interpersonal relationships rather than my job and my career and, the intellectual pursuits that, we all do as academics, if I'm talking about in my life and with the people I love, then, it's time to just give it up and, give someone a hug and tell them that you love them and
Dude,
say language will not solve everything and make it better.
dude, that is so good. One of my favorite answers. My favorite answer is, guy goes, what do you do when language breaks down? He goes, group hug.
Wait, I'm sorry, you broke up. Say that again.
He says group hug.
Group hug.
And
Yeah.
my favorite answer of 40 years is, what's your favorite form of information? Craig Baldwin, the great filmmaker, said a hug. No, he said human contact. And Magnuson said a hug. So we don't think
Right.
generally of human touch or hugging as information. But you saying, if language breaks down, hugging is a really good answer. I love to hear when people say that.
And being human,
Yeah,
right? I mean, here we are talking about ideas and
yeah,
that's the life that I live. That's the career that I chose. I think and
yeah,
talk and write but yeah, sometimes
yeah.
it comes down to just being a human being.
Yep, that's it. McLuhan learned from Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Thom, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I don't know if most people look to the arts for that reason and with that purpose. I think, that's a tough one. I lost my thought.
But it is funny
Question.
the way you took it was, it's not so much people look to the artists, they're broadcasting, and it's their choice how they're gonna, you saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. They were literally, Ed Sullivan was broadcasting, visual and sonic information, and it shaped you somehow. So
Sure.
people don't realize that the way the artists, it's not so much on their intention, is that art is always telling us something about what's going on. So
Oh, sure.
people generally don't, I don't even want to generalize, people don't sometimes process that, there's something deeper here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of folks with art, they have a hard time, especially, in a popular cultural milieu, they have a hard time separating out art from commerce. They have a hard time saying, what's out there and presented to me that really is just about this commercial uh operation, presenting something that sounds like music, putting something that I'd hang on my wall in my living room, and it's not really separating out what's art from what's commercial and saying what is really valuable
Yeah.
in all of the media arts to us. That, I mean, you have to look for that first, and I don't know if everybody does or can.
Yeah. No, this is really heavy. It's Robert Williams, a sort of underground comic who turned into the Salvador Dali painter guy of highbrow art museums. He says, if it matches the couch, it's art. If it demands attention, it's culture.
I'm trying George Dickey. The book is somewhere in my office here.
Oh, that guy's great. Yeah.
Yeah, Art and the Aesthetic. He's, when you say, how is that piece of work hanging in the Museum of Modern Art? It looks like something my 3-year-old nephew could have done. He's like, yes, right. You have made meaning out of that work, and it's not wrong.
That's Sun Ra. A guy went backstage at a Sun Ra concert and he goes, my kid could do that. And he goes, yeah. And Sun Ra went, yeah, but can he transcribe it? Do artists have moral obligation?
I think a real artist, I think a good artist does have a moral obligation. It is to him, her, themselves first to really find what it is he, she, they have to say, have to offer us. And, if they're lucky enough to present to us work that has that value, once it's out there, yeah, they've got to try to hold true to what it is they've done in the first place and keep on bringing it. Yes.
Here's a McLuhan line I've been trying to process for years, and he posed it as a question, thank God. How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So basically, there's a difference between art and technology. We might differentiate that.
Sure.
But then there's conscious, basically what's he's saying, technology is unconscious and art is unconsciousness. Can you suss that out? Any thoughts on that?
Well, with respect to technology being unconscious, I'm thinking that McLuhan would be referring to the ways in which it's sort of invisible, right?
Yeah.
And not something that we think of first when we think of the things we do with it.
Yeah.
But with respect to art being unconsciousness, as a person who, creates art, tries to, you do your best work when you're not thinking, when you just let it out, right-brained, no, criticism, put it down, edit it, work with it later.
Yeah.
That's when the stuff comes out that shocks you and surprises you, and you didn't know you had it in you.
Yeah. That's his great line. Balinese have no word for art. They just do everything as well as they can.
I know that line. Yes, absolutely.
The no-brainer. It's like, duh.
And we should all live like that.
Exactly. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I am not afraid of new ideas. I think, we want people to generate ideas and generate them in context of, right? They don't come out of a vacuum. We want to test them. We want to be, we want to agree to disagree. And, if we're trying to go back to my professor, my mentor, Henry Perkinson, if we're trying to make things better, that's the only route to get there, right?
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Oh, I absolutely can. As a matter of fact, I gave a talk where I invoked this pretty recently. My earliest memory is visual. I was 3 years old, and I know that because it was a summer vacation on the Jersey Shore. My birthday's in July. It was in August. and I was walking across a bridge, which I had opportunity to actually drive across about a couple of months ago. And I looked into the bucket of a guy who was fishing and looked at his fish.
Yeah.
And again, I was 3 years and a month old.
Yeah. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I am haunted by memory, but when I say haunted, I don't find it to be a curse. I would say that when we talked about consciousness before, consciousness is completely tied to memory. Your conscious existence is the time in which you remember things about your life. Before you can remember, what again, we perceived things as infants, as toddlers, but and this has something to do with language acquisition, right? Too. But at some point you start to be able to hold on to things in memory. And to me, that's a chunk of what we refer to as consciousness.
Yeah. Thom, tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
Well, my dad, in my early adulthood, wrote down on a piece of paper and he gave it to me. It said, "The quality of a man's life is in direct proportion to his commitment to excellence, no matter his chosen field or endeavor, period." And I remember that, and I still have the piece of paper somewhere here in my office. My dad wasn't always the perfect role model in my life, but that statement marked me and my entry into adulthood. Outside of my family,
Thom, could we go back for a second?
Sure.
Whose quote was that? Do you know?
He didn't say. He didn't say. Nope.
I'm going to Google it, so I'm going to find that out. It's interesting, but you don't think it was his original, or it sounds like something I've heard.
Yeah, I talked to him about it at one point, and I think he said he got it from somewhere, but at that point I wasn't like looking for citations,
But the other thing is that different? Oh, how does that, if it does, differ from work ethic? Did you get a work ethic from him, or is that something else you got from him?
I got a work ethic. I don't know whether I got it from him or not. My wife and I, we both have a work ethic, and having brought up two sons, we sort of wondered, wait, why didn't it automatically rub off on them? It took a while, right? Everything in its time. Did I get my work ethic from him is an interesting question. I mean, maybe so, maybe.
No, most people, it's funny because I've explored this work ethic thing. In Wikipedia, about the third paragraph down, it says, "This might be a scam from consumer capitalism." This work ethic. Because boomers, we have a work ethic. We probably got it from our parents because they were hard workers.
Sure.
But who knows? I mean, it's just something to think about. Okay, now outside your immediate family.
Outside my immediate family, so I mean, I have a series of mentors in my career, and I don't mean to minimize the contributions that any of them have made by pointing to one, but Neil Postman, who I studied under in the media ecology program at New York University, was, well, you know what? I'm going to give Neil credit as a mentor with respect to learning how to write. Although I will never ever be able to write as well and as elegantly and eloquently as he did. But you know what? I also have to give credit to another member of that program, who was Christine Nystrom, who was sort of the unsung hero of the program in a lot of ways, although one of her books just came out by virtue of two of her students editing it together. It's called The Genes of Culture in 2 editions. And she was the most linear thinker that I've ever met in my life. And, she said one time in a doctoral dissertation seminar, she said, sentences are choo-choo trains.
Wow.
And I was 25 years old. There was someone in the program who's, I think, approaching their 60s. And, that's like saying something you would say to a third grader, but it stuck with me. And again, her mind was just supremely linear.
Wow. So she was like under Postman, or was they competing as professors?
She was one of his students, and she wound up staying on and becoming. There was a troika of three, and sort of Henry was the fourth person, although he was outside of the department. And I was there in what kind of was the heyday where the three of them ran it and had all of us doctoral students running around, trying to become them.
Wow. So it's Christine, Henry, and Neil. That's good.
And Terry Moran was the
Terry Moran.
Yeah, Terry Moran was the third. Yeah. Like I said, Henry was from a different department, but he palled along with them because they were really interesting people. Great people.
Let me just interject a quick thought about Neil Postman or question. McLuhan says he's applied Joyce. We know he says it direct. He says, if you don't study all of James Joyce and the Symbolists, you're not going to get me. I've found the MEA people are not Joyceans. They don't want to be Joyceans, and they don't really care for even considering reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. But that's all right. If you were going to say the parallel to Neil, if he was saying, because Joyce said, I'm applied Aquinas, that they're the the core from. So Marshall said, I got it from Joyce. Who would Neil say he got it from? What would you say? I'm curious.
Well, I think he got it a little bit from Bertrand Russell, but I would say it this way, and I think most of my colleagues would agree. He got it from Marshall. And what he became was the guy who took Marshall's work and clarified it. And made it again. He won, I forget what year it was, the George Orwell Award from the National Council of Teachers of English for clarity in the English language. And so as a public intellectual, he was able to present those ideas that I gave my mother, his book Amusing Ourselves to Death for a birthday present one year. I said, Mom, this is so you know what I do for a living. And again, this is a woman who, she read bestsellers and romance novels, and she read the book in a weekend and said, thanks. Right.
Yeah. No, that's good. It really helps, because do you know this about Woody Allen? He changed Marshall. Marshall's line is a question. Do you mean my whole fallacy is wrong? And Woody got the world to know Marshall. In fact, Ryan Johnson became a filmmaker because of that scene. He got Woody got Marshall to say it as a statement, which is the opposite of what Marshall is. But I always say, then there's a McLuhan line that applies. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So even though Woody gave the world Marshall backwards, it still is, at least he gave the world Marshall.
Sure.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like, my hesitancy with Neil and Marshall is clarifying Marshall is almost like backwards. You don't want to clarify him. You want him to be that way because that's his impact. But I mean,
I mean, and to bring Christine back into it, Christine was the person who really grounded, I don't want to say grounded Neil, but sort of created this ground for what media ecology became. As we sort of talk about it as not a subdiscipline of media studies, but as really a discipline, a field of thought in its own right. And so that's due to Christine.
That's great to know. Thank you. That's really good. You're teaching me a lot. Were you raised a particular religion?
Wow, that's a great question. So my mother's family is Swedish and Irish, And they started out, even though her father was the Swedish side, they started out in the Catholic Church until her father had a fight with the priests, and they went down the street and became Episcopalians. My father's family, the Italian family, were Catholics, but when these two folks got married and had the conversation about what do we do about our kids, my mother said, "I don't care if you really think it's important, you deal with it." And so we started out being brought up as Catholics. So I don't want to make the story too long, but there was a summer that, I grew up out on Long Island. We went to the beach every weekend with a bunch of families, and we stayed the whole day. And come time to go back to school, end of summer, and I go to, we didn't call it catechism where I was, but anyway, go back to the whole thing. And I had to make confession, and I told the priest that I missed mass, and he heard it in my voice, and he said, "So how many times?" And I said, "Oh, 10, I think, maybe." And there was a pause. And he said, and I think I was 7 years old at the time. He said, "You're going to go to hell for that."
Oh my God.
And so that was the end of it for me. I mean, I was prescient enough to say, well, Craig Dorfman, my buddy, he's Jewish. He never goes to church. So is he going to hell too? And, and that was it. It was all over. So I'm a sun worshiper now. That's
Do you pray?
Maybe I don't think of it as praying. I certainly don't talk to God. I don't know what God is. I know that there is some explanation for how you and I are sitting here having this conversation, but damned if I know what it is. So, I mean, maybe I'm, asking for things in a way, hoping for things in a way, talking to myself, or thinking I'm talking to some greater power. I don't know.
That's good. That is, Thom, that's an answer I get a lot. Just what you said. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
You did good.
Yeah.
You were a good man.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Evil people exist. Yeah. Again, this is what keeps me up at night, to go back to earlier in the conversation. And they exist on a scale. There's small evils, and then there's Ukraine.
Yeah. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And Thom, I'll set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah. I'd like to think that I can deflect, that rather than, let them get to me, rather than to let them win, I'd like to think that I can take a step back and handle it without them having power over me, getting the results that they want. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it's what I try to do. And by the way, I think, Machiavelli's in this too, right? About keeping your enemies closer, right? I think that's originally from Niccolo Machiavelli. But I would agree with Watts. Yeah.
Yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, as a creative person like yourself, this is what some people do. is to take life as it is given to them and to take what is going on in their experience and the way their brain works and say, I am going to tell a story, and I'm going, we tell our stories in different kinds of ways, but we are, as a species, storytelling creatures,
Yeah.
and we're bringing it. So that's why it's out there and why people choose from time to time to take advantage, to attend to it.
In fact, Hollis Frampton, the filmmaker, said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die.
Mm.
Can you forget to die?
No, I I think that you spoke to a colleague of ours, Corey Anton, whose latest book is about facing death and how it influences the way we live our lives from the moment that we first really, I don't know when it happens for people. I remember being a young adult and feeling immortal for a little while, and then suddenly, the fuse, went off, and I said, "Oh no, I am mortal. I am going to die." And from that point on, that realization of non-being affects what we do and where we go and how we live.
Yeah. I flubbed and I missed this one question. I want to go back when we were talking about enemies, Thom.
Oh, sure.
This goes like this. Nassim Taleb says, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. When I told someone that, they said, well, villains don't think they are bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. In fact, Gregory Bateson says, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, I just didn't have my criminal skills up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, does punishment work?
Does punishment work? It depends upon what the crime is, right? I mean, if you ask me, does punishment work? And of a father of two boys, and I brought them up to adulthood. As a matter of fact, I was lucky enough to say at my son's recent birthday, I did my job. You've become an adult. But if you're talking about punishing a child, that's a lot different than punishing a criminal, and also punishing the criminal. It's like, well, what was the crime? What did the person do? Again, I keep referring to today that we're having this talk, and that it's a 1-year anniversary of a war criminal.
Yeah.
Does he deserve punishment? Yes. Is it going to happen? He's going to die eventually, but
But even like that's what my problem with Fog of War by Errol Morris. McNamara pretty much admits he's a war criminal, but he says when you win, you write the history book. So, when his obit came up, it didn't say in the New York Times, war criminal dies. It says war hero dies. So did he have to fight his conscience, or did he just say, hey, I did the best I can, like the Balinese? I'm a strategy person in this defense, It's like these guys who rationale war, they go, well, World War II, we had to have it. I'm like, I'm anti-war, but it doesn't mean we know the real.
I remember when we were brought up at some point in schooling, and I don't know, maybe it's from our parents too, in the United States, anyone can grow up to be president.
Yeah.
And at one point I said, I wouldn't want to be, not that I was ever going to make it anyway, but I wouldn't want to be responsible for making decisions that meant that people were going to be killed.
Yeah.
It's not that's just a burden. That's just not anywhere a part of who I could possibly be as a human being walking this planet.
Yeah.
And by the way, with respect to McNamara, when there are guys who are megalomaniacs and don't ever second guess themselves and don't ever look back, but besides the headline in the New York Times, if you read about those guys and that time, I think that history has exposed them for what they did and who they are.
Right.
It's just that not
Right.
everybody reads it.
Right. But again, what if we slap their hands and put them in a country club jail? What does that do?
Yeah. Well, that's the history of the world. That's where I don't think we're getting better, because these people are gonna, when you asked me about evil before, these people are gonna keep coming along. They're gonna keep trying to do what they do for the reasons that they do, for power, for the trappings of power. And um, you know, I would like to think that, again, education would slap them, out of the
Good.
thought that they should be that kind of a person. But
But
even
that's really good what you said, Tom, because I would fill that in with the next question. How do we keep our governments from going to war? Let's say you said education or whatever you want to say. But put that aside, how do we keep our governments from going to war?
so I'm teaching a class in ethics and media right now, and most of the students in the class are women. And we just had this conversation, believe it or not, yesterday. And I said to them, but they all agreed with vigorous head nods, that women need to
Yeah.
get into the positions of power.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that would be my first answer. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's like why hasn't Oprah run for president? I mean, they ran Reagan. Come on. And
Yeah,
you
well, I don't know if we need more celebrity presidents and celebrity,
But yeah,
politicians.
that's all you're gonna get. You're not gonna get anyone else elected. But it is
Yeah.
funny, what you're touching on there is this new movie I highly recommend, Laura Poitras, probably win the Academy Award for Best Doc, The Beauty and the Bloodshed, and how an artist in New York who protests these people who invented Valium and opioids, and their names on every art museum. And they
Right.
go, get these names off of these art museums. And they succeeded. The Guggenheim, the Met, all dropped their name.
Mhm.
And so what? What does that do? I mean, it feels like we won. Like here's a big doc saying the little person won, but in the long run, yeah.
All of those people died and continue to die from that product. I haven't seen the doc, and I don't really watch, episodic television, even through the streaming services that we have
Yeah.
now. But there was a show that I did actually start to watch for a couple of episodes. It was about that family. I don't know if we should name them,
Yeah.
and give them, and yeah, go back to talking about evil.
Yeah.
My goodness.
But Tom, it's amazing. This woman is an amazing documentarian. At the end of the film, she has their faces in a Zoom at a court case where the judge is saying, well, all you did was declare a bankruptcy. You still have your money. And so what? Your name's off these art museums. And you see their faces. Now, they're just raised rich kids. They don't think they're doing something wrong. They think people have a choice to take a drug or not to take a drug. So anyways, it's a deep issue, and I appreciate when we get hope. Like, we thought the anti-war movement in the 60s stopped the Vietnam War. Probably didn't, but it still galvanized us to think war sucks.
Sure.
We don't need war. There's other ways to resolve conflict, please.
And I was just a kid at the time. I was not, of age to be out there protest, but it marked who I am for sure. Yeah.
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 So, yeah, marking who you are. Tom, walk us through just briefly the tipping points where you decided to be an educator and decided to be a music person. The two tipping points. You're raised in going to school. Your dad's, giving you the trumpet when you're young. Where was it? I'm going to be this. That's my calling.
Yeah. I didn't, this is stuff we were talking about before we actually got on. When I was 3 and 4 years old, I guess I was 4, two things happened, and they happened through television. And one was, watching, cartoons one afternoon. I wasn't in school yet, and suddenly the special report comes on, which to this day always gives me, well, they don't do it so much anymore, but it used to give me shivers every time it would come on. And it was the Kennedy assassination, and there was nothing else on television for the next 4 days. I sat on my father's lap that Saturday morning when Oswald was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail, and he was assassinated live on television. I remember all of this. And then 4 months later, I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show with my family. And, pretty much those two things start the trajectory of my life. I became a musical person. You mentioned that, my dad played the trumpet, and he was responsible for me getting started. And I started earlier than I was supposed to in school. I was in the orchestra and the symphonic band when I was, 7 years old, I guess second grade. You're not even supposed to start an instrument until you're in third. And, but I didn't go on to study music and to have a career in music. I mean, I would like to have, been able to make a living from my music, but I didn't go on to study music in college and university because I do popular, I do words and music. And there isn't really much of a place for that in the world of, higher ed and scholarship and academia. And I was influenced by, again, it's not just about music, but it's about music as a media art form, and the sort of, cultural and sociological part of that, where this stuff goes on, and it has such a it reaches so many people and impacts their lives in ways that matter so much to them. That was the stuff that I was always interested in. And I sort of also, just one last point, I don't want to make this too long, but I guess because I came from this background about art as communication, and specifically music as communication, how does music mean? What do you mean that music itself, without words, without lyrics, has meaning? That's the stuff that led me sort of, I guess, from music directly into being a student of all of the media arts.
And then that led you to being an educator, you mean?
Yeah. Well, so the educator thing, I did get out of college, and I did try to make a go out of music, and say, well, this is going to be a pretty dicey living. Be nice to, have benefits and things of that nature. And it hit me, well, what else was I gonna do if I wanted to make a contribution and do good work? This is where, I mean, if you asked me when I was, 18 years old, I had no idea that this is where I'd wind up. But it evolved into it, and again, it's been a great run.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I'll interject really quickly. This guy who's a huge pop star, he's the male Lana Del Rey Borns. And I was talking to him. I says, he's making $1 gazillion at 22 or whatever. I says, what do you think of the music business? He says, interesting. I says, that's a wimpy word. Frank Zappa says, in order to be in the music business, you have to sell your cock and your balls. And Borns goes, I thought you only had to sell your soul.
Oh, Frank had a lot. Hey, now, I mean, I was just reading an article the other day about this woman who is a songwriter and had a song on, well, I won't mention the name of the artist, but a very famous singer. And she had to, give up a part of her copyright to this woman, with the idea that, well, she actually did change the song and write part of the song that she wound up recording, whether or not that's true. But this is an album that's going to sell in an age of streaming, 500,000 copies, and she made $4,000.
Yeah.
So, what music business would be my answer? It's like, there's a music business for a small, 1% of 1%, or 0.1%.
Well, I mean, we could talk music forever, but one other comment I love is, they asked Nancy Sinatra, when did the mob enter the music business? And she said, honey, we invented the music business.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah.
And so
Frederick Dannon wrote a great book about this back, 1990s. It was called Hitmen.
Yeah.
And, that's what it's about. Yeah. Great storytelling.
Yeah. So a screenwriting teacher told me great art Great music is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a song?
I think about it's attributed to Picasso, but I think it's also others. That a great artist, a good artist borrows, and a great artist steals.
Yeah, yeah.
Obviously, we're an amalgam of our influences, and we try through that to our own writer's voice, our own persona comes and cuts through out of that amalgam. Um, I, to me, I'm just trying to create good work that lives up to my standard for myself, my standard of excellence for myself, you know?
What
And
do
that's true of my scholarship and my creative work. Well, my
Yeah,
scholarship
well,
is creative work, but
that's good, Tom, because Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your listener when you're writing your song?
oh, okay. So from in the study of rhetoric, you're supposed to think about your audience first, right? You always, who am I writing for? Who am I speaking to? But as an artist, if you start to think about that stuff, oh, that's a bad rabbit hole to go down. Um, I, I, I would say that as an artist, I'm thinking of myself, but that sounds like a contradiction or a tension, at least, right?
Well, no, that's actually what Zappa would say. He said, "I write music for myself. If other people like it, that's a bonus." It's like, yeah, right, Frank. I think I'm not dissing him, but I'm just saying he over romanticizes because he knows if he hits this note or this lyric, kids are going to buy his record. Then he can make more music. So you can't erase that we've been raised in a consumer capitalism society when you have music as a product,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I think Frank did that in his words. I don't know if
Yeah,
Frank did that, I mean, and again, we could talk about Zappa for a while too. I don't know
yeah,
if Frank did that in his music. Frank did stuff in his music that it's amazing that
yeah,
at that time he had the audience that he had,
yeah.
because
No, it is. Yeah, but even "You Are What You Is total pop, and to the fact that Thundercat just ripped Frank off, this new hit guy, and he's like he just redid Teenage Win almost, and in the style, and so it's like it's all good. It's like what you said about stealing an influence. That's again back to Harold Bloom. You absorb your influence and then you abandon them. It's
mm,
like good luck. That's again what Frank said is what is a genius? Frank said it's when you plagiarize and they can't tell you who you plagiarize from.
right. That's great.
And yeah, we know Frank can plagiarize the Mike Jones and Edgar Varese.
Definitely
Sorry.
Edgar Perez. Yeah, no, Mike Jones. I got okay, and yeah,
Okay, so
oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just gonna
What?
say during the age of hip hop, when we started sampling, right?
Yeah,
And when the sample is obvious, then the lawyers from the label come along and they say, well, okay, well, we got to give these people, their royalty. And okay, so what did they start to do? Then they started to mask it. They started to,
yeah,
hide stuff and bury it and do it backwards. And it's like, oh, you want to play that game? Okay, well, now we're really going to make sure you tell us every source of every sample, and you're not going to make any money whatsoever.
yeah. So two of my film heroes touch on something we're almost going to. Got ESP. George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, a great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. I know it's both and it's stupid. Just your thoughts, prompt. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I don't want to give you an academic answer, but I always come back to Kenneth Burke in his first book, which is called Counterstatement, where he basically says that the role of an artist, and we did sort of start, talking about what does an artist do? What is an artist for? The
Yeah,
role of an artist is not to self-express and
yeah,
to talk from his, her, their own experience, but it is to make a statement against the life's world of the times.
Yeah.
And really that completely jibes with McLuhan talking about artist as antenna of the race, right?
Yep. And anti-environment, but can art making be egoless?
You know, if I were a great artist, I I would probably say that, you know, past a certain point, I would know that I was. As a person who's had the, you know, the career that I've had, I think I'm pretty egoless, but I can only talk from my experience.
That's great. Thom, that 80% of people go, no. And then about a year ago, a woman said, great art is egoless. And then about a month ago, a woman said, it has to be egoless. So that's a deep question because of our sense of what the word ego means.
Mhm.
It connotates different things from what Carl Jung says and Freud says. And so the the three T's of music, my friend says, are taste, technique, and theory. So you've learned how to play the trumpet, you know what chords or structure. How does one acquire taste?
Well, so taste as a player, taste as a creator is one as soon as you brought up the word taste, I started to think of it on the other side of things, right? On the auditor side. And I don't mean to take your question in a different direction, but when I've been lucky enough to teach pop music as communication, lucky enough to do what one of the things I love to do, which is to sit around with people and talk about music.
Yeah.
Um, when you realize how much of what people listen to and love and rationalize, that it all comes down to the fact of their taste, that one of the best musicians that I've known personally all my life, you know, once said to me that a person who truly loves music learns to listen to all music with an open mind, and he doesn't, right? He listens from his own, and he'll say, you know, oh, that sucks. That's, you know, I'm not interested. Wait a second. What did you, you know, what did you say to me once? Right. Taste as again, a creator, a player. Um, that's, I mean, that's the ultimate, right? Again, to go beyond technique, to stop. I remember Quincy Jones in the We Are the World video, right? He said to everybody that was playing the track, he said, okay, now let's do it again without thinking.
Yeah.
Forget about the technique, right?
But again, I'm just going to ask again, how do you acquire taste? Where does it come from?
I don't think it's necessarily innate, although I think it is for a lot of people. I think that taste can be acquired in the sense that, you know, Miles said, you know, sometimes it's just there's just one note, and
Yeah.
you know, sometimes the note is a rest.
Hello, man. You really anticipated a question. But let's go on the taste word for a second, because this is McLuhan. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
Well, then there's a lot of language difference here in contemporary day in the United States, but I don't think it's language based. I think it comes down to stuff we've been talking about with respect to artist commerce. And not that young people listen to radio anymore, they're all listening to streaming services, but you know, consultants in the radio business in the 1970s were responsible for stratifying our listening
Yeah.
and our taste as a result, because they said, you know, hey, if you got 95 radio stations, and we did in the New York metropolitan area, the biggest market in the world, well, you know, we've got to orally position ourselves so that when you're going through the dial, you know what our station is because of what it sounds like, the particular genre, the particular style of music we're going to play.
Yeah.
Um,
What's more fundamental, music or language?
you're not asking the right guy. For me, I live in a world of both. I think for most people, language is the answer. Um, I think I wrote a paper a long time ago. I never published it, but I talked about the fact that you can sort of put people as music listeners into 5 camps, right? One of them is that there actually are people who really don't really care about music at all. There are very few of them, but there are. Then there are the people for whom it's oral wallpaper, right?
Yeah.
That matches the sofa, that, and the drapes. Then there
Yeah.
are people who they'll listen because somehow what they're listening to was validated by someone or some force or some institute. And then there are people who trust their own ears and their own instincts and find stuff. And then, and not that this is the highest level of listening, it's just a different type. Then there are people who understand the symbol system that is music, who are musicians.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great breakdown. So you also touched on this by bringing up Miles. Ben Ratliff, music writer, says, I mean, sound is long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So you said it. Me and you could hear Miles blap, and we go, "Oh, that's Miles."
Sure.
So yeah, well, that's, you can know it. He said Miles, fragile and pointed. Coltrane, slightly undercooked and urgent. If a music writer that you respected was saying, "What is Thom's sound?" Just, not ego, but just, oh, they got it. In a couple words, what would you say to describe your sound?
Yeah. Wow. This is an interesting question. It makes me think of, like, how do you describe what a saxophone sounds like to a person who can't hear, right?
Yeah.
Sincere, I would say,
good.
right?
Yep.
Honest.
Yeah.
Crafted.
That's good.
I'll stop there.
That's good. You did 3. That was really super cool. So McLuhan said, everything we invent extends some humanness. What does the trumpet extend for you? What humanness?
The trumpet by itself has an incredibly plaintive sound, almost haunting sometimes, again, depending upon what you're playing and how you play it. But I've always, and I don't play the trumpet much anymore. That's not really what I do. That is my roots. That's where I come from. But I feel like solo trumpet just sort of brings out that plaintive is the only word I keep coming back to.
Oh, that is a great word, because it's not evident. It's hard to put things into words like music. So plaintive is good. So I talked to Michael Apted 40 years ago. I says, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France, but in 1980s, MTV, this was flourishing, rapid montage, fast editing, to the point where Marty Scorsese said, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. I asked the question with a bias. Can we actually literally learn to take in information faster? Or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Oh, I absolutely think that we're brainwashed. Well, I don't think we're brainwashed. I think that this is what we're delivered, and we just deal with what we're delivered, whether we are able to make sense of it and think it works or think it's good or not.
Can humans literally multitask?
I am a terrible multitasker myself. As a matter of fact, the only joke I think I've ever written in my life is that multitasking is doing half of 2 things at the same time, or a third of 3 things. The educational theory at the turn of the century said, that there's this new learning style for, young millennials, and they're able to multitask. And I'm like, no, they're not. They can't do their homework and, instant message and listen to music and watch television at the same time. They can't.
Yeah. We used to do our homework and smoke a joint at the same time.
I had a friend who used to do differential equations while he was doing bongs, and yeah. And he became an actuary, actually. Yeah.
There you go. What was the motive of the cave artist?
I think it started that someone cut their finger and just wiped it on the wall
Oh
and
my
said,
gosh.
"Wow, look." I think that it started from because no one, thought to like, oh, let's make some pigment and let's, take some kind of implement and hammer it down so it's like a brush. But it's the beginning of storytelling. And if I could add to that, I don't know if we'll
Yeah.
go further with this line of questioning, but ever since we've been doing most of our storytelling, with some exceptions like music and theater, right, on two-dimensional surfaces, which is one of the things that makes virtual reality and the idea of immersive media really interesting, that we might finally get past the two-dimensionality of it.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I love that. That is so cool, Tom. I actually cut my finger and I had this little framed canvas like this big. And I went, oh, and I just rubbed the blood on it. And I showed it to this guy. We're making a film. And I says, look, this is a piece of art I made with my blood. And he goes, that's gross. That is, no one's ever said that. You should see, you know what everybody says, oh, the evoke magic, evoke the deer. So that, one of my favorites is what's the motive of the cave artist is to keep people in the cave.
Well, I also talk about the fact that, it's like, I think you say the word spelunkers, right? Those
Yeah.
caves, you got to be pretty gutsy to go to those places. And so, well, why did they go to those places in the first place? And, we sort of talk about the idea of, the tribal elders, the shamans, the folks who had the guts to go there without, being able to bring a torch because they could barely fit. And there wasn't, necessarily on the way there enough oxygen for the torch to stay burning or
Yeah.
to help them not burn themselves. And, yeah, I mean, it's obviously about the roots of ritual and things like that. By the way, we had a colleague, Ed Wachtell, I think, wrote one time in a paper he presented, he said, and the flickering fire made it into the first movies.
Yeah. Yeah. That's into first movies. Yeah. That's good. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Since you're asking me, and I'm a person who tends to like to mediate conflict, and I'm not averse to conflict at all and to confrontation at all, but I tend to be a mediator. I tend to try to, make things work for everybody, even
So
when
you're
they
saying
don't, when they're not going to.
you're saying compromise is more important.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, guess what, Tom? There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. Literally, again, 80%, 80% of people say conviction. And, I'm asking these questions because I want to reinforce my own thinking.
Right.
And I like when people answer it the way I want to have it answered, but I don't argue with them, But it is amazing how few people do say compromise.
Interesting.
And one of my favorites was, what's more important, conviction or compromise? The guy goes, depends on what you mean by important. You've
I have to admit, you're throwing some curveballs, so.
You've accomplished a lot, Tom. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
I have to say that I have been lucky. That I look back on my life and I say, when it came time to make a choice and making that choice precludes you from doing all of the other things, it worked out. I don't live my dream existence again. I wish I was making more music and making more of my living from music, but I've had a lot of luck. Skill, I think maybe ambition comes second for me. Just really trying to do something and trying to make something out of my time on the planet.
Yeah. The question used to be, is ambition based more on fear or joy? And everybody would say fear, or a lot of people would say fear. And then all the positive people would say joy. Then I read William Friedkin said, in Hollywood, skill and luck have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition.
Okay. I thought you were going to say it's all fear, because
Yeah.
making sure you don't get stabbed in the back.
You touched on this one. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
My inner, what language? I mean, it's in English, but that's not what you're asking.
But no, it's more metaphorical, I'm asking.
Yeah. My inner dialogue is, my temperament is that I am an artist. That drives everything. And so it's the language that's not really language. It's all of these other things that are human inventions and symbolic systems that, the most important one for me, obviously, has been music itself.
Yeah, there's a couple things. Gary Snyder, the beat poet, said, poetry is seeing the world without language and then putting that seeing into language.
Mm.
And one of my favorites was a great experimental filmmaker in New York City, Abigail Childs. I says, what language is your inner dialogue in? She goes, I wish I knew.
By the way, I thought it was attributed to Roland Barthes, and I've never been able to find the citation ever since, and no one's been able to help me, but I thought it was Barthes who said that poetry is taking two words that have never been put together before and putting them together.
Yeah, that's good. I'll look it up. I collect all these especially with poetry. Well, we got to do this one with poetry. I always Leo Bersani's Mallarmé study. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. So it's just like, and I don't like the word crises or threat, but the threatens the writing of music sustains musical composition. It's sort of an interesting conundrum. Any thoughts on that? The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
I think that to take language and to use language in ways that people haven't used it, and to take it to such an extent that you make a mark in doing so, right? Again, languages are our common denominator for what we consider meaningful and making meaning. And to take that tool, that invention, and do just the coolest things imaginable with it makes poetry magic.
Yeah. I have to ask, have you ever read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people?
I have not.
All the McLuhan people should try it once. It's just one time you sit down and you just read a couple lines in a group of people, and you don't have to discuss it even.
Right.
It's flipping that. It's language about language. And you can see where Marshall got pretty much everything he knows from the Wake.
Sure.
Yeah. And so is perception reality?
Reality is reality. Perception is all we've got to come to grips with it. And, we better hope that our perception's close enough. And what we do with that perception is the right thing to do.
That is brilliant. My friend made a fake experimental film. It's really good. Look it up on YouTube. Uso Justo, Usojusto, Coleman Miller. And I says, is perception reality? He says, that's all you got.
By the way, what's a fake experimental film?
Oh, it's amazing. You got to see it. Anyways, it's just like, Spinal Tap or whatever, it's
okay.
Okay, McLuhan probed Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, saying artists dream awake. And not to sound elitist, but it's like everyone has this power to create these amazing scenarios in the middle of the night when they're sleeping. But artists also kind of do this while they're awake. Have dreams played a role in your creative process?
I actually wrote a song, working on an album right now, and we're trying to see if we could get a version of it out that I'm happy with. But the title of the song is "I Do Not Remember My Dreams," because
Wow.
I don't. I remember bits and pieces,
Yeah.
but one of the lines in the song refers to, that I wish that we could just record them,
Yeah.
and because all of us would be like Kurosawa,
Yeah. That's good, because my theory is the purpose of dreaming is to dream. It's not, you don't have to recall them if you can, or you think that suss them out, they're doing something, but that's the amazing thing.
Yeah, interpretation. Yeah, come on, look at what your mind is doing.
Yeah.
During the non-waking hours. Wow,
Wow.
what an interesting organ the brain is.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Wow, I don't want to refer to political things. Um, but those are the first ones that come to mind.
Well, that's fine.
There's a series of possible court cases and indictments going on right now. But I think it's impossible because I see, the foot soldiers all getting indicted and going to jail and getting fined, and I don't see the people who instigate things. They
Yeah.
seem to all be getting away with it.
Yep.
I mean, how can you be held in contempt of Congress and be, sentenced to go to jail, and you don't?
Yeah. Thom, tell me one major element of your creativeness that stayed the same and one major element that's changed in the years you've been doing this.
Well, there I've got to talk about being a writer. And I've got to give props to Neil Postman, who we've talked about here. My natural inclination as a writer is to go off into the weeds, and I have learned to change that by teaching myself to edit, to get that clarity, to try to be accessible and engaging. And it's a constant tension there because my natural inclination is to not be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's totally me. I appreciate you saying that. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I am a perfectionist, and it is the bane of my existence, but it is how I reach for God.
Yeah. That's good.
Whatever God is.
Yeah. You spelled it wrong. It's D-O-G. It's not G-O-G.
Thank you.
Ain't nothing but the dog in me, as George Clinton would say. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When I keep it to myself and pour it into my work.
Nice. I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, can satire be destructive? He says that's the job of satire. Now, if me or you made a cartoon in a certain country and they killed us, some people think dying is destructive. But Jonathan Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. In fact, Zappa says, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else. What's the function of satire?
The function of satire is to hold up that mirror, but not just to look back at the whole of us, but also, I think, ideally and inevitably, to look at ourselves in that hole.
Yeah, it's good. What's the most significant difference between men and women physical aside?
To go back to an earlier question and my answer to it, I don't think women are driven by ego in the way that men are, that leads to the abuses of power and all of the struggle. That is why we human animals are still animals way too much of the time, no matter how civilized we've tried to make ourselves through language and reason and ideation.
Yeah. What caused matriarchy?
What caused it? You mean it happened already? I mean, well,
Well, there were, I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
I mean, not here, not in Western European and rooted cultures, but
yeah.
although in Western Europe they have had women prime ministers and presidents. I mean, if matriarchy has existed and has been, civilizations, cultures have maintained it for a time, I would say it's sanity.
Wow, sanity is a great answer. Because Tom, I'm serious. I think I asked Eric McLuhan this, and he said men, but I mean, really, what caused matriarchy is biology. Women give birth,
Yeah.
but in a sense, sanity is an amazing answer because it's like, well, they're giving birth and they're nurturing, and they're running the household. So why don't we let them make,
Yeah, again, I'm teaching this class in ethics, and we're talking about Nell Noddings and the ethics of care, and it doesn't come from feminism; it comes from motherliness and motherhood.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's a line, we sort of covered this, but I want to go over it. There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. And now I'm not saying you, Tom. One creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So any thoughts on this line? You create what you resist. One creates what one resists.
I mean, my only response is I don't see that in myself. I try to create what I want to see and what I want to be. Yeah. That's my answer.
How do you find peace of mind?
I find peace of mind sitting at my piano when no one is in the house and just becoming unconscious.
Wow. I was going to ask you, you write your songs on piano or guitar or both?
Both. I mean, so to go all the way back to, those days when I was a little kid and how this all started, I brought the trumpet into show and tell in second grade, and she immediately sent me down to the music teacher. And I remember this clear as day. And the music teacher, the first thing he said is, let me see your hands. And I showed him my hands, and he said, oh, never mind. Because I don't have piano hands. I play like I type. I have short fingers, and yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I do write on it. Yeah. And, I know theory because of it. Thank God. Right.
These are 5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words. 1, who started it all?
Who started it all? Wow. The person who picked up a stick and realized that it was a tool and a weapon and a drum.
Beautiful. Are we going to make it?
Are we going to make it? Yeah, until, the universe decides it's bigger than all of us.
Where do we put it?
In a nice, quiet place.
Who's cleaning it up?
I am, but I'm telling you about myself. After everyone.
Thanks for saying that, dude. You know how many people, 80 to 90% go, not me. You know,
Okay.
our kids, no one takes responsibility. I am. That was good.
Mom, right? Yeah.
5, is it serious?
It's always serious, but let's try to remember not to take it so seriously.
Yeah. Actually, that's a great Zappa line. I'm very serious about being not serious.
And he was, yeah.
So, Thom, I have asked you for 90. Can you go a little more? I just got a few more questions.
Yeah, sure. This is fun.
Okay.
This is fun.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Don't be afraid.
Wow. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Under.
Wow. Why?
It just seems right. I don't know.
Well, dude,
Maybe because that's how it
right?
always was in my house. I don't know.
Well, 90% say over. The patent, which is 100 years old, says over, but the people who say under have their reasons. So it's interesting, you know.
It just looks right.
Yeah. If a
Unless
publisher
you're at a
was
hotel and then they
they
corner it like that. It's
like,
so
yeah.
that's so nice, yeah.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Wow. I hear music in my head.
Beautiful. They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Oh. Lavender.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Well, it would be made of stone because stone is heavy and it will last. Where would they put it? I think I think I would put it somewhere on the French Riviera, maybe in Nice.
Nice. Nice and nice.
Yeah.
Thom, tell me something good you never had, but you never want.
Something good I never had, but I never want. Too much money.
Yeah. Guess what? The 3 answers I get the most: money, fame, and heroin.
Which one of the 3 doesn't fit? Well, interesting. Yeah.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Pass. I don't know what to do with that question.
Well, you know,
I wouldn't be out of vomit in the first place.
Well, that's one of my favorite answers. I'd never be in a situation like that. But check this out. This woman on Venice Boardwalk once said, I'd take the velocity of the bag of shit and swoop my way out of the vat of vomit. And I said, do you know that's the descent into the maelstrom? That's McLuhan's, beginning of his writing career.
Uh-huh. Except the vomit part, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's Poe put it in the ocean with a broken up ship part. So,
right.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Ooh. So we talk a great deal, and this is from, Marshall's book, Gutenberg Galaxy, among all kinds of other places, about the communications revolutions, about the inventions that have really changed the trajectory of human civilization and what it means to be a human. And they're all positive and beneficial as we moved forward over the ages. And when my students are talking about their contemporary media culture and environment now, they don't have a lot of nice things to say about the things that they spend too much time with, like 6 and 7 hours a day using their phones, and most of that time is spent on social media. They realize that it's not a good thing. And I hope that as a result of that, they will be able to negotiate a future where they counteract what they see as negative.
Yeah, I was lecturing art students once, and I says, "Well, everybody in this room has a cell phone, right?" And one woman raised her hand, "Nope." I says, "Why don't you have a cell phone?" She said, "'Cause I lost it." And everybody laughed. And she goes, "Well, I'll have it back within a week." I said, "Well, this is a good example of like a media fast. How has it shaped your behavior without it?" She goes, "I have clarity."
Oh, yeah. I had a student a couple of semesters ago. He wrote a senior thesis. He found 6 people his age, right? College student age, who got completely off social media. And he asked 2 questions. He said, "Why?" and "With what consequence?" Great
Yeah,
thesis. It was great.
yeah. But I mean, Tom, in the big picture, what's the difference between us being addicted to landlines and transistor radios or TV or books and anything that's, it's basically spoken word, printed word, electronic word? Is it really that, I mean, is it
You
over
well,
a little?
the list you brought up, the one that stuck out for me in terms of thinking about what we would call, loosely addiction, is reading. Because reading is this sort of solipsistic, you're just concentrating and you're shutting out the world and you're trying to concentrate on those little black marks on a page. And I thought about, again, I brought up bringing up my kids. I spend a great deal of time sitting in front of my laptop, but I use it to do work. And of course, the kids at some point for school and whatnot, we had to get them a laptop. And what did they do with it? They played games. And so, they see me on mine and I see them on theirs, but we're doing 2 different kinds of things.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah,
Well, it goes back to the war thing for a second. My friend was complaining because his kid was in the other room on a video game. War, 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 bang, bang, bang. And then I go in the kitchen and talk to my friend, and out of the radio in his kitchen was war, war, war. And I was like, "What's the difference?"
right, right. Yeah, gaming has become a huge business. All of these colleges and universities are starting gaming programs because there are kids growing up who play games and they think, "Oh, I can go into a business of making games." And
Of course.
wow, are there a lot of young men who want to do that. I don't know
Yeah.
if how big the industry is. I know it makes more money than the motion picture industry at this point, but
Oh,
I don't
it's
know how many
huge.
people are employed doing it. I don't know.
Yeah. It's huge. It's just like this thing about coding. That's all. I mean, if you're going to have a career now, you go into coding or you go into writing. And then chatbot came along, and now all my friends who are professors like you are like, "Oh my God." And my one friend is studied McLuhan with us for years. He said, "Yeah, I'm going to have a course that's how do we use chatbots to write good papers?" Like, don't fight it, incorporate it to figure out how it's shaping our behavior.
My colleague Mike Plew said, "Why don't we stop having students write papers and why don't we give them oral exams and
Yeah.
have them just, talk about things with us to see what they know."
Yep. That's another thing. McLuhan used to say, when it was first on video games, you could only have 2 people playing at once. Then the third person would go outside and play. So that
Mhm.
caused kids to go outside and play.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Now
Well,
3, 4, and 5 of them can sit in front of a television and the gaming system can track their eye movement from across the room, which is frightening.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I got 2 major questions, but before we do, I'm curious. These 2 major factors in your life, people, events, and sensibilities, music and Neil Postman, or
Mm,
whatever you want to say, McLuhan, Neil Postman, media ecology.
yeah.
You've sort of touched on this, but how have they shaped your behavior? How has music shaped your behavior, and how has Neil shaped your behavior?
Um, I mean, music has mostly shaped my behavior when I'm in the process of making it. I don't
Yeah.
think outside of that, it really has much to do with how I behave. Um, I, I I think all of the arts, when it comes down to it, is trying to live in a world where we make beauty. And so, if I've committed my life to trying to do that, and given trying to be an intellectual, trying to be an academic, trying to help the world through language and words, I don't know if I look at how far that's gotten us, and power still wins. So if I'm going to do something, let me try to create beauty as a
Yeah.
behavior, as an act.
I like that. And let me just interject. There's a great Tom Waits line. The best music doesn't want to be recorded.
Ooh, yeah, that's great. That sounds like Neil Young too, who, he always wants that first take because it's, that's the genuine one. We're not, you know, thinking about it. We're just feeling our way through it.
First thought, best thought. That was good. You put it because you say music made it shaped your behavior and being aware of, if I'm getting this right, of being in the process, like be here now,
Yeah,
being in the immediate. Yeah.
yeah. Which
So
might
how
be
about,
in my head, might be playing an instrument.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's an amazing thing. Yeah, all Patter says all art aspires to the condition of music. It's like painting, poetry, literature, all wishes it could be as cool as music.
Mm, yeah.
So how about Neil and Marshall in that basic sensibility? How has that shaped your behavior?
I mean, to answer that question, I guess I'd have to lean toward Neil
Yeah,
mostly because I guess what I would say is, Neil taught me that what we're doing as people who do research and scholarship and write, you do it because you're trying to help. You're
yeah,
doing it because you're trying to make it's not about trying to be smart and oh, I love to write and I'm a good writer, and
yeah,
it's in the end you're trying to tell stories that will help the
yeah,
human endeavor. And again, what's criticism? When we talk about doing art criticism, art is criticism is to make things better
yeah.
and try to help.
That's so much up on my alley. It's so simple. It's like, how do we make the world a better place? It's not that hard to try.
Would that we all would
Okay.
do it.
Yeah. Okay, Tom, we got two more and we're out of here. Thornton Wilder said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
What's it really all about? Um, I totally admit that with respect to doing music, I do hide it and create it with respect to words. But then on the other side of what I do for a living as an academic and a writer, it is about putting it out there and being as clear as possible and making sure I am not misunderstood,
Yeah.
and hoping I'm making a dent.
Yeah. Beautiful. What gives you the most optimism?
That I'm sentimental, but I'm not nostalgic. I always think that tomorrow is going to be great and something's going to happen, and I'm trying to make it happen, and I just keep on marching forward.
Yeah. Zappa said, don't stop and keep going. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Well, it's sure been enlightening, Tom. This is super fun. Just to end, the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? I got that from Wilhelm Reich. He says the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yeah.
And the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? This is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, other people. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person. Marshall, just to close out, Marshall had a great line. He said, communication of the new is a miracle, but it's not impossible. And you've really communicated a lot of newness to me, so I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. I had a good time, and really looked forward to it. And looking back on it, it's been great.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Thom. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends. We can keep going forever and ever. And if you're ever out here in Venice, California, let's jam, dude.
I'd love to. I would love to, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Thom.
All right, take care, and thanks, everybody.